Oh, welcome in everyone to GDT Live here on a Monday morning. I am your host, Colton Davies. Dayton Camo is currently off being a civilian today, working his other job. So Dayton is not around, so I will be running the show myself. But today we got Marco D'Amico from RG Media joining us. Should be a great chat with Marco. We're going to chat about the Montreal Canadiens, talk about Michael Hage, talk about LJ Mooney, Lane Hudson, Zack Bolduc. We'll get to quite a bit with Marco. Of course, as always, you guys can put your questions into the YouTube chat and we will get to them. The Holinka Gretzky Cup is underway, and Canada won this morning 5-3 with Ethan Belchetz having a wonderful game, as well as Keaton Verhoff, the UND commit. Verhoff has had a pretty good performance so far. It's just one game, of course, but even in the pre-tournament games, Verhoff was looking unbelievable. Obviously, a guy who's going to go, second overall this year. Frank Saravalli, formerly Daily Faceoff, of course, has put out his projection, and he even believes that Verhoff could push Gavin McKenna for the number one position in the 2026 NHL draft. That is an interesting one to me, just because I don't know. I feel like McKenna is the clear-cut winner. He's the clear-cut favorite. But if Verhoff can have a fantastic season, then who knows what is really in store for those guys, right? I think as everybody has been talking about, it's just going to be, what is Verhoff going to be able to do this year, and as well as McKenna, what is the NCAA landscape going to look like for those two? Are they going to, they're going to get thrusted right into it? Are they able to manage and handle 20 to 22-year-old men, 25-year-old men? There's a lot of factors into it, I believe, but I'm excited to see how McKenna and Verhoff do. So I'm excited. And this Holinka Gretzky Cup tournament, we're gonna get through this here and over the next little bit. It's gonna be fun to watch all these young kids playing, and we got a big draft class coming up here in 2026. But without further ado, we got Marco D'Amico waiting for us backstage. Let me just, before we bring him on, let me just do a quick ad read for Quench, of course, as you guys are always aware. So feel your grind with Quench Hydration, zero sugar, bold flavor, and real results. Get 15% off your first order at quenchhydration.com with code GameDayTarps. And with that, let's bring aboard Marco D'Amico from RG Media. Oh, that's the wrong one. There we go.
There it
Hi,
is.
Marco. How's it going?
Not bad in yourself.
Not bad. How was Egypt? I just saw some photos of you getting back.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I would highly suggest people do that at least once in their life. Not as
That's
hot as
awesome.
everyone thinks it is, especially if you live in this summer heat in North America. So definitely a good time, good to reset. But now back to business.
That's awesome. Speaking of back to business, Michael Hage has had a big World Junior Summer Showcase tournament. Stephen Ellis here at Daily Faceoff, of course, has listed Hage as a guy that very well could be the second line center for Canada going forward. What did you make of Hage's performance at the Summer Showcase?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually watching it on my phone, in the van rides between cities, but I was left impressed. A goal in every game, responsible play, relentless, chippy, even against a fellow Montreal Canadiens prospect in Aatos Koivu. But you saw a lot of what he actually wanted to work on this offseason. So the last time Michael and I spoke was probably in April, after the end of his NCAA season. And that's exactly what he said he wanted to work on, is be more physical, use his body with more consistency, have a little bit more pride in the two-way side of the game, and be able to help his team in any way, shape, or form. we saw exactly that during the World Junior Showcase. He was played at center, I believe, for 3 or 4 games, and then ended up playing on the wing the other game. But I think that versatility and that consistency in all the games that he played, and the way that he played, I think he scored a lot of bonus points with Team Canada. And I would also add that stigma of the NCAA player, right? Because he's, of the players there, he was the one that actually played in the NCAA last year and was like the outcast, as opposed to now everybody jumping ship because they opened up that rule. That's also going to benefit him because that stigma is now gone. Half of Team Canada is going to be based out of the NCAA probably this year. And so I think that not only helps his chances, but with the summer showcase, I think, it's fair to say that he has an inside track on getting into that roster.
Do you feel that he is like one season away from kind of getting his shot here in the NHL? Do you think that maybe after this season here in Michigan, they might give him a chance, or is it still like a couple years away?
Well, so when you sign out of the NCAA, generally it's at the end of the season. And so because you can't sign entry level contracts and retain your NCAA status, they burn the first year of their contract, so they have to play in the NHL. The only way around it is to go the Jacob Fowler route, which the Canadians did, sign him to an amateur tryout, and then have his entry level kick in later. Now, with a guy like Hage and where we expect Michigan to be and Hage to be this season, I think the chances of him accepting an entry, like an amateur tryout and going the American Hockey League route to start may not necessarily jive for a prospect of that degree. So there's a good chance that he, does his second year in Michigan and then signs his entry level contract, probably finishes the year in Montreal. And then, you see where he's at in 26, 27, whether it's a full year in the AHL or if he's ready to jump in a top 9 role in the NHL. But I think one of the things to keep in mind with the Canadians is that, at center specifically, they currently have a situation with Kirby Dach that they're trying to figure out right now. And if that doesn't work out, then the Canadians are going to need to have a more immediate solution in their 2C hole. And I doubt that rushing Michael Hage into that situation is going to help as well. So part of me is in a wait and see scenario, just because we're talking about, 9 to 16 months down the road. But I think with a strong NCAA season, you could see him do the 2 years and then jump, like we've seen with, what the Canadians do with Cole Caulfield, for example, or Lane Hudson, for example. So it's not outlandish. In fact, I'd say it's the prototype for like non-top 10 picks coming out of the NCAA prior to the CHL transfer rule. So to me, I think it's going to end up being something like that. And then you kind of evaluate where he's at and where the team is at that point.
What about Aatos Koivu? He's a guy that has just been, he had a wonderful time with Finland here at the summer showcase, and it was awesome to watch him. Another guy that just seems like a diamond in the rough, another great pickup by Kent Hughes and the Habs. What do you make of Koivu's development and how maybe he can fit into the depth chart with the Habs?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of fans were a little worried simply just because of the season that he had in the Finnish Liga. I mean, he was fighting mononucleosis, and that's the reason I believe he missed the World Junior Championships, was because he was sick, or else he would have probably represented Finland in his draft year. Fortunately, that didn't work out. And, it was really difficult for him to get his footing at that point, coming back from that mid-season, and then the playoffs start and this and that. So it's really hard for a young player like that to get his groove. What I found was, he kind of took that to heart and worked even harder and harder and harder on his physical attributes. And I think those kind of came in handy at the World Junior Showcase. Like everyone kind of knew that he had the hockey IQ, being able to position himself in scoring situations and to make himself available for the shot. It's ironic, his father was more the playmaker and he seems to be more the sniper. But it is interesting to see because the Canadians do covet that kind of forward. And, whether it be at center or on the wing, I think that's a really good problem to have, and the Canadians have an abundance of young right shot forwards kind of coming through the ranks. So I wouldn't be shocked if, he continued to develop in Finland for a year, perhaps another year after that, so maybe 2 years, and then make the jump to the American Hockey League, just because he missed so much time last season. But in terms of depth chart, he's one of those guys that you don't want to write off. Like the Canadians have kind of built two avenues at the draft floor. They're drafting these big kind of role players. You think of the Tyler Thorpes, the Hayden Papanikis, guys like that kind of have that gritty third line element. But then you also have a guy like Aatos Koivu who can probably play, if he hits really his potential in a top 9 situation, be it at center or on the wing. So similar a little bit to Michael Hage in the sense of where he could be utilized, although Michael Hage has more of those prime tools to be able to get him there quicker and for longer.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that as well with Hage for sure, but not knocking that development of Koivu at all. I mean, I think he's going to be a very fun player to watch. Now, another fun player, and we talked about this kid last time we had you on, but LJ Mooney. I mean, what a performance out of him. Another great tournament from him, looking like a star player for US. What do you make of Mooney and how the Habs are able to hit on these prospects?
Yeah, I mean, hit, I guess, in terms of value, right? Because upon being drafted, he's probably worth more than your typical 4th round pick right now, just because. But the risk is always, will he overcome the size and make it to the NHL? I'm obviously not going to be the one to doubt a guy that's been doubted his entire life and proven people wrong every single step of the way. We saw that with Lane Hudson in Montreal. We saw that with Cole Caulfield in Montreal. And, we just finished talking about Zack Koivu, being 5'11" in the 90s was basically 5'7" today. But there's just more of an acceptance of players like that being able to play long-term in the NHL. But I think the real question in Montreal is how many of those kinds of players can you have on the team and still be competitive in the playoffs? And so that was the discussion. But when you get to the 4th round and you have a talent like Mooney, you don't ask those questions. You pick him up and you worry about the problem later, which is exactly what the Canadians decided to do. And so when you see him in tournaments like this, I mean, Mooney has been I wouldn't say dominant, but has just been a presence internationally for the United States at every single level. And, this was no different. These are the kinds of tournaments where a player like him will shine. And, I think Team USA kind of knows that. He's got the silkiness, the hockey IQ, the puck handling, the just incredible skating mechanism. It's just everything is there except, vertically not. And that's really unfortunate because if he, I was told that if he were 6 foot, he was a guaranteed 1st round pick. So that goes to say exactly everything you need to know. So when it comes to a tournament like this, and you have a couple of older guys, right, a couple of last year's draft class, and you're kind of thinking, okay, how are you going to build out this roster? I wouldn't be surprised if Mooney found a way to edge his way onto this team as kind of an extra forward to start, and then eventually work his way into the lineup. Because again, from the coaches that I've spoken to at the development camp to the people at the University of Minnesota, everyone was really excited and ranted and raved about him and his character and what he can bring to a team beyond just the TikTok videos that we see of him. So to me, I think you saw more of the same. I think he wowed people the same way at Canadians development camp. It's very similar, and I think if he comes out of the gate on fire for the University of Minnesota, I think it's going to be an undeniable push for him to be part of this roster as well.
Now, one more player to get to just from the summer showcase, and that's Owen Protz, who seemed to have a good little tournament and showing with Canada, and a guy that we've had Brantford Bulldogs GM Spencer Hyman on, we've had Reed Duthie on, and we've talked to him about Protz, and he's a physical two-way D-man, but what do you make of him just getting an invite even to the summer showcase?
Yeah, I mean, you always want to have a variation of player when you create a team, right? You always want a mix of good players. You can't have the same kind of player on all 4 lines on all 3 pairings. And I think Protz, being that kind of hard-hitting, physical, stay-at-home defenseman, I think, obviously there's other left shot D that can do that right now. You think of Kashan Aitchison, for example, but when you're, this is a 19-year-old's tournament, generally speaking, unless there's a generational talent like a Connor Bedard or potentially, a Gavin McKenna. So to me, you have to see what a player like him can do. And obviously in the OHL, he's one of the best defensive defensemen in that league. And that was known last season is probably one of the tougher of the three leagues to play in offensively, right? In terms of being able to shut down guys with efficiency. And so, with the success that Brantford and then at the time Hamilton was in terms of producing really good defensemen that the Bulldogs were, it just really kind of speaks to his development. Whether or not he makes the team is a completely different story. Obviously, he's going to have a strong start to the season, in my opinion, for them to really consider him in that lineup. But when you start getting cute with your decisions and you start putting too many defensive defensemen and not enough offensive defensemen, you run into the same troubles that Team Canada ran into last year, where they didn't have enough offense from the back end once Matthew Schaefer got injured. So I'm of the ilk that it's a significant pat on the back to a young man who's put in a lot of effort, but it all really depends on momentum going into that selection camp and how he's able to perform there and shut down, his teammates and display an ability that will make him unique in the eyes of that coaching staff.
Absolutely. And getting to one player who I believe is going to have an absolute breakout season, and I may have brought this up last time we had you on, but Zack Bolduc. I had a conversation with someone yesterday from the NHL media world and just texted back and forth about him. And he 100% agreed with me that Bolduc is probably a player to break out this year and have a monster year in Montreal for just a couple factors. He's from Montreal. He's from that area. He knows what it's like to play in big games. He's played for Quebec at the Memorial Cup. What do you make of Zack Bolduc's addition, and what do you kind of see an expectation for him this year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, whenever you're able to bring in a local player from the province of Quebec, I think he's from the Quebec City region. It's always a plus, I guess, for the team. But I think it's more the type of player that he was, the gritty factor, that number one forward on the forecheck kind of player, the guy who's able to go into the slot and get lost, that bumper on your power play. Like, he just checks so many boxes. That left shot. I mean, there's so many aspects of his game that the Canadians don't have that they went and got him for a reason. And the Blues did not want to let him go. I mean, there came a point, I remember talking about this with a few people, but the Blues basically circled back with the Canadians and were like, fine, we'll give you Zack Bolduc for Logan Mailloux, because there were obviously other teams involved in the discussions for Logan Mailloux. There wasn't just the Blues. He was sought after commodity. Obviously, close to NHL ready right shot defensemen are very hard to find. So when Bolduc's name was asked, the Blues didn't want to trade him for obvious reasons. And so when push finally came to shove and they needed to make sure that they got at least some young piece on defense for next season and for years to come, Bolduc was then sacrificed. And so with the Canadians, it's intriguing because he's obviously going to have a top 9 role. Is he going to play on the third line? Is he going to play on the second line, second power play wave, right? So he's definitely going to get his looks. He's definitely going to get his opportunities. I think the more interesting situation is you always get to a point in a season in like December or January where a team just hits a slump and a coach throws his lines into the blender. And that's when some of these younger guys get an opportunity higher up in the lineup. Well, that's exactly what happened to Zack Bolduc after the Four Nations in St. Louis, right? He was playing top line and first power play wave and was one of the highest scoring rookies in the NHL and had nearly a point per game pace in those last 20, 25 games. So that's where I'm intrigued to see a player like him, because there are a lot of wingers ahead of him on the depth chart. You have Yaroslav, Cole Caulfield, Ivan Demidov. You still have Patrick Laine on that team. So there's your top 6 right there. And then you have Bolduc knocking on the door. So that's where I find it intriguing, right? If you can get a situation where, for whatever reason, there's an injury or a player is just subperforming and Bolduc is played on that second line with an Ivan Demidov, that combination could be quite interesting, because again, this is a multi-50 goal scorer in the QMJHL. Like, this is a guy who could put in the back of the net, scoring at a 23 or 24 goal pace. Once Jim Montgomery was brought in as head coach. So I see the positivity in his regards. I personally said I see him as a future 50, 60 point player when he eventually hits his peak and plays on a second, a respectable second line. But it's just the intangibles, that physicality, the no nonsense kind of physical play that I think is going to be the real added bonus to that group. Because again, like we talked about with building the World Junior Championship roster, it's always good to have a mix of players to kind of build the championship team.
Yeah, of course it is. And looking to next season, like another young guy that I kind of wanted to look towards is Uri Slafkovsky. Like, is there an expectation for him to have a big year this year?
Yeah, I think it's beyond he's beyond due at this point, and not because not to be negative in that regard, but it's just he is a player that 2 years in a row just really difficult starts to the season, right? Not, or at least first halves of the season, right? Like he started off well because he was raking up the points, playing on the top line, top power play wave last season. But at 5-on-5, it was a little difficult in the November, December time period. And then finally kind of came back into full swing after the Four Nations break and whatnot, and salvaged the season. But if Uri Slafkovsky plays the full season like he does the second half of the season, he'd be a 70-point power forward. And I think that's the indication. That's the desire of the Canadiens management team, is that consistency needs to set in, because if he can start the season the way he finished the previous one, then chances are very high that he is going to be in the upper echelons of scoring on the team, and especially in the division. For a player of his ilk, those kind of power forwards are extremely rare. Right now, playing top power play minutes, playing on the first line with Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, getting that rub, that kind of helps with the point totals. But you want to see him be a little bit more of that dynamic power forward with skill that the Canadiens fell in love with in his draft year. And I think that's the key, right? I think him not being able to tack on at least 10 points on his career highs this season would be seen as kind of I wouldn't say a step back, but just kind of a missed opportunity for him, because it's clear he has the ability to do what he does on a consistent basis. It's just a question of being able to reach that level of consistency and work on those weaknesses in his game that are clearly fixable and that can really help him take a next step. You think about his shooting mechanics, you think about his first 2-3 steps, you think about his situational awareness in the neutral zone. If he could tidy up those three things, first line player every day, all day.
Absolutely, he is. And I'm wondering if this is the year, though, like for sure. Like it seems like it is. This is the year where he can get 60, 70 points and maybe solidify himself. But we've had this conversation about Quentin Byfield and Alexis Lafreniere, and there's other players that kind of haven't quite done that yet. But I don't know. I guess maybe I'm in the minority where I think Slafkovsky can have a big year this year.
Yeah, I think he can have a big year, but I think the difference between a guy like Byfield, for example, or Lafreniere, for example, is they had a lot of good quality players playing ahead of them on the depth chart, right? Like Byfield's playing behind Kopitar. Lafreniere was playing behind names like Panarin, Bushnevich at the time, Kreider at the time, Mika Zibanejad when he's playing on the wing, right? So like he was always on that third line and maybe on the second line here or there, but like the power play utilization was nowhere near what Slafkovsky has. So like that's why it's hard to look at the two. When I look at a guy like Slafkovsky, he's had every opportunity. And, you see it in spurts. So, it's very possible. And again, it's just finding that consistency. The only difference is that there was no one really to challenge him for that spot on the top line up until April 8th of this year, when the Canadiens signed Ivan Demidov. That changes the dynamic. That puts internal competition on blast, because the Canadiens don't have an established number 2 center. So if at one point or another that top line is not producing for whatever reason, swapping Slafkovsky and Demidov is a very real possibility, and he's got to be ready for that, because then he's going to have to drive the second line that he's going to be on whilst the first line is doing its thing. So that's where I see it. To me, I think that having more quality depth on the team, guys like Bolduc, guys like Demidov, is going to help kind of motivate a guy like Slafkovsky to also reach a next level in his development.
Now, one player I just wanted to touch on here, and we'll get down to the wire here, and I'll let you go. But Cole Caulfield. Now, Cole, 37 goals last year. I'm a huge Cole Caulfield fan, mainly because I am his height. So me and him are the same size. So I love Yeah, I love the smaller guys. Do you think he can hit 40 goals this year?
I think depends on what happens with the power play. I would say, right? Because I think there's two ways of looking at this. I think that if the Canadiens didn't acquire Patrick Laine, and Patrick Laine ended up taking Cole Caulfield's spot in the power play, I think that Caulfield would have hit 40 goals had he retained his spot on the power play. However, I don't know that the Canadiens would have made the playoffs. So there's your trade-off. There's your trade-off.
Yeah.
Now, do I think that now that the Canadiens will probably be able to ice two competitive power play waves, that we may see Laine split from that first wave like we saw in the playoffs, where the Canadiens moved to a diamond formation with Caulfield and Demidov on each circle, and having them kind of 1T like Tampa Bay used to do back in the day. And then have Patrick Laine on the second wave. Well, if that happens, I think the Canadiens are going to have far more success on the power play, and I think Cole Caulfield would be far more inclined to hit that 40-goal mark. I think it's once the Canadiens have a viable secondary scoring artillery on their roster, be it a 5-on-5 or on the power play, that's when the ice is going to open up for that top line. And I'm talking about Nick Suzuki, just coming a hair from hitting 90 points. And I think to myself, where is his ceiling if there's a competent number 2 center behind him to share the matchup load, especially on the road. So I feel the same way with Cole Caulfield, right? Everyone knew that Cole Caulfield was going to be the guy to shoot up until the Canadiens acquired Patrick Laine. And that separating the two kind of gave an opportunity for Caulfield to score in different ways. And so I think next season, you may see a little bit more of that because you have Demidov and Bolduc in the mix as well.
What about Lane Hutson? Like, should we expect a 70-point season out of this kid this year? Like, what on earth is going to happen?
Yeah, that's a really hard call. The first worst take anybody can make is a projection on a player in their sophomore year. I think that to me is just like, I have difficulty. Seriously have difficulty because I have made some very accurate predictions and I have made some catastrophic predictions. Do I think he can replicate a season from last year? Absolutely. I think that if Lane Hutson would have started the season on the first power play wave, as opposed to getting on there probably, I think, mid to late November, he could have probably finished the season as a near point per game defenseman. Mm-hmm. So with that said, and I say near point per game, like 73, 74, 75 points. He finished with 66. It's not that outlandish, right? We're talking about 10 to 15 games where he wasn't on the top power play wave. So there's a possibility that he can reach 70. Now, obviously, many things go into that. Health, right? You go into your sophomore year, teams have tape on you now. Teams know how to counter you now. So now it becomes a question of how do you outsmart the opposition that has built a literal game plan for you. And so that's what separates great players from elite players. And so that's really what's going to be the defining factor for me when it comes to will Lane Hutson reach another level this year. And I think he's got the IQ for that. He's one of the most intelligent players I've ever seen, tie up a pair of skates. And to see him play live sometimes is just, you're like, what did I just witness? So I'm of the ilk that he can reach the 70-point plateau. Again, health, and they would need to click almost right away, the same way they did last season. Because last season, there was a situation where they seemed a little tired prior to the Four Nations, prior to the Christmas break, because the Canadiens were very much overutilizing their first line and their top pair. Now that you have Noah Dobson, that could take a load off of Lane Hutson and allow the minutes to be a little bit more distributed.
You talked about how Hutson is just like incredible to watch in person, and it reminded me of when Olin Zellweger played here for Kamloops, and watching Zellweger was just like, you'd be watching him and you're like, how is he doing this? Like, what is going on? Like, it's just remarkable watching those types of players with their just insane elite talent. One player that I just saw recently on an RG Media article talking to you actually about was Mason McTavish. What's kind of the word around that? Would the Habs have interest in him?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a number 2 center available on the trade market, the Canadiens will pick up the phone. I think that's
Yeah.
a guarantee at this point. I think it's the last major piece of their puzzle, be it waiting for Michael Hage to fill that role or trading for a long-term solution in that role and then slotting Michael Hage on the wing. I think that is obvious for them. What's not obvious are what are the Anaheim Ducks' intentions. From what we've heard, the expectation is this is all off-season smoke. The expectation is that he is to start the season in Anaheim. I think there's a lot of connecting of dots because of what went down with Trevor Zegras and Pat Verbeek back in the day in a similar situation where there was a holdout and then eventually this and eventually that. I think a lot of fans are also looking at the drafting of Roger McQueen, who was this massive center, as if they wouldn't draft McQueen if they wanted to keep McTavish. I mean, well, who else were they going to take? There was a clear delineated top 10, and I don't think they were taking Nesbitt, or any other centers. I think everyone kind of understood that McQueen, if you're going to take a forward, McQueen was the best player available on the board at that point, outside of potentially Victor Eklund. But again, size and Pat Verbeek, right? He likes his big players. So Roger McQueen makes sense. And he is 2 to 3 years away of being a regular top 6, maybe even top 9 NHL player. So I don't think that factors in either. So everything I've heard out of Anaheim is all fluff. People need time to talk about things in the summer. But Detroit has called, Montreal has chimed in and just kind of like, where are things at? But there are no trade discussions being had. He's not being shopped. And the only thing that's going to get the Anaheim Ducks to even pipe up in a discussion for Mason McTavish is going to be a top pair right shot defenseman or a player that is projected to become a top pair right shot defenseman. So those don't grow on trees. The Montreal Canadiens paid dearly for one in Noah Dobson. And I think that potential future top pair right shot defenseman, you were talking about Verhoff before, there's Landon Dupont next year. There haven't been a lot of them coming through the draft ranks over the last 5 years, as you've seen in previous 5-year slots. So they've become extremely commodifiable positions in hockey that you simply cannot ignore. So a team that's going to step up to trade for Mason McTavish is going to have to put one heck of a defenseman on the trade table. And I just don't feel like anyone's willing to do that right now with the summer of trades that we did not get in July, because everybody wants to do a player for player trade, right? Everyone wants to sell their player to get another player while the rest of the league is looking to trade futures for that player. So that's why you're not seeing much activity right now. So I think the Mason McTavish situation finishes in a bridge deal, and they'll kick the can further down the road. But I think I think McTavish has to get a feel of what it's like playing for a guy like Joel Quenneville first before they decide on his long-term future. The only thing I will say is McTavish finished the season in such a ridiculously strong way that, I think this is all just Pat Verbeek playing hardball with his RFAs as usual, and this will get resolved, before training camp or during training camp.
Marco, do you have a breakout candidate yourself on Montreal, or a guy that you think can have a big year that people are just kind of underlooking?
I think Caden Gooley. I think last year it was just a little bit of a cluster F on the back end. And, Mike Matheson was playing like 30 minutes a game in some situations. Lane Hudson was, very young. David Savard, unfortunately, reached the tail end of his career. The injuries started catching up with him. And then the trade for Alex Carrier mid-season, it was chaotic. And I feel like now that you go and you acquire a guy like Noah Dobson, well, the perfect player to pair with Noah Dobson is Caden Gooley. And I think that combo is your top pair next season that can play against the team's top opposition, that can be a force at 5-on-5. And I think he only benefits from being able to play with an offensive defenseman like Noah, who is going to be able to get him pucks. And the benefit is that both of these guys are excellent skaters as well. So you're going to be able to attack not only on the rush, but along the blue line as well. So I like that combination. And I feel like if he could stay healthy, this is a guy who could really put himself in the steal category when you look at his contract at $5.5 million for 6 years, which only effectively started last month. So he's a guy to watch, in my opinion, because if Caden Gooley reaches a point, right now I think it's arguable that you could say he's a good number 3 on the Montreal Canadiens. But if he can reach a next level, if the Canadiens can have 3 defensemen of top pair quality playing 1, 2, and 3 in their lineup, then you're really set for 4 to 5 years of solid contention once your forward core catches up.
He was a beast with Prince Albert and with Edmonton, and watching him in the WHL, man, like a man amongst boys in some games for sure. So yeah, I love that pick. That is an awesome pick. Marco, my last one for you. The Montreal Canadiens have not had a lot of jerseys, like a lot of different jerseys, but what is your favorite jersey that they've ever worn?
That's a toughie. I think in their centennial season, they brought out the entire shop, right? And they, I know it's cursed, right? In if you ask Canadiens fans, cursed, but they had like this barber pole style jersey from back in the day.
Yeah.
And I found that hilarious. My grandmother loved it as a kid. She was really a big fan of it. And, I always thought it was cool. But to me, whenever I look at a Canadiens jersey, the old school original C, like the almost handwritten one, will always be my favorite. Obviously, I don't make them anymore, but I still have the concept art over here that I was able to get in an auction. It's just gorgeous.
Oh, that's awesome. One more. What is your favorite non-Habs jersey?
Favorite non-Habs jersey, man. That's tough. I think I probably have to go with the retro Canucks across the jersey. The skate, the one that Pavel Bure used to have, like the one that goes right across. That was sublime, absolutely sublime, and I love whenever it comes back out again because I used to find that just so fascinating of a jersey, and I'm not a big fan of writing your team name as a logo, but that was just excellent.
Fantastic selection. Hey, Marco, thanks so much for joining me today, man. You're the best.
Oh, always a pleasure, man. You have yourself a good one.
Yes, you as well. Thanks. That was Marco D'Amico from RG Media. Great little chat with him. We're pretty much gonna wrap up here. I'm on a different banner and I shouldn't be. So give me 1 second to fix this. There we go. This is what happens when you have to produce the show yourself. But thankfully, Dayton knows how to walk me through all this. Thanks to Marco D'Amico for joining today. Absolutely awesome chatting with him. And tomorrow, we got Brendan Batchelor from Sportsnet joining us. Brendan is the voice of the Vancouver Canucks over on Sportsnet Pacific. So he will be joining us tomorrow to chat about the Vancouver Canucks and what's all going there. And that's about it for tomorrow. Rest of the week looking fun. Not going to spoil anything because I have a tendency to tell you guys the guests are coming on, and then something seems to always happen with that. And eventually they do come on, but you know what I'm kind of getting at? I think I jinx myself. So I'm not going to say it anymore. But I'll tell you who's coming on tomorrow because I do have that confirmed. So Brendan Batchelor tomorrow at what time is it? 11 Pacific, 2:00 Eastern. Yeah, that's what time we're doing the live show. Sometimes I forget. My brain's all over the place right now. That's about it for us today, though. I think Data might be back tomorrow, so you might get a 2-man show out of this. If not, I'll just be soloing it again. But hey, big shout out to Willie, Randy, and Boost in the chat today. You guys are the best. We'll be right back here live tomorrow at 11 p.m. 11. Oh, I almost said p.m. I am fucking this up. 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2:00 Eastern, right here on GDT Live.
What's going on, everyone? Thank you for tuning into another video over here on the Game Day Tarps podcast and the Hockey Podcast Network. We've got so much more where this came from, so smash the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell, turn the notifications on so you never miss a beat. For myself and the rest of the guys over at Game Day Tarps, we thank you, and we'll see you next time.